Let's talk to Sir John Curtice, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. John, like London buses, these referendums come along so often. Why call for another independence referendum now? What's the significance of the timing?
The reason for Nicola Sturgeon's announcement today is that having got last year's Scottish Parliament election behind her and got re-elected, having forged a coalition with the Greens, having then got local elections out of the way at the beginning of May, and with the pandemic hopefully behind us, she now thinks that the time is right, not necessarily to start the firing gun on the referendum, but rather to start the firing gun on beginning to campaign from her perspective, i.e. to put forward the arguments in favour of independence. So basically, this is an announcement saying that now those on the yes side of the argument need to start going away, campaigning for yes in the hope of turning public opinion, which at the moment is still pretty evenly divided on the subject. Nobody could be sure which side would win, trying to generate a majority for yes. But behind this, the essential reason why Scottish independence and having another referendum has been back on the policy agenda so quickly, the short answer to that is Brexit. The UK government having decided to leave the European Union and so doing to pursue a pretty hard break with the European Union, when Scotland itself voted by almost 2-1 in favour of Remain, that has led the Scottish government as long ago as March 2017 to say it wanted to hold another referendum. It's not been able to do so far, but there wasn't any much prospect of it giving up on that ambition. And now I think it's hoping that maybe at last the path is clear for it to start to try at least to try to make progress on the subject from its perspective.
But from what you're saying, a high-risk strategy, given what the polling might be saying. Well, tell us more about what the polling is saying. Would supporters of Scotland's independence win this time round? Sure.
It's a high-risk strategy. It's equally, however, equally high risk on the Union side because they can't be sure of winning either. So, I mean, there are two ways you can look at it from Nicola Sturgeon's perspective. Perspective number one is, well, it's all very tight. Actually, the polls at the moment, you're slightly behind. You've never had much more than 52, 53% support for independence. And that was now a fair while ago. Why take the risk as opposed to playing it long? On the other hand, she can say, well, when we embarked on the 2014 referendum, the opinion polls at that stage, some of them suggested support for independence was low as 25. And certainly even when we got down to asking questions about yes or no to independence, support for yes was starting off at around the 37 mark. Look where we ended up. We ended up at 45. Well, now I'm going to start off at 48, 49. So that looks to me like a reasonable risk to take. So it depends on how you look at it. But sure, this is not a risk-free operation. There's no guarantee that Scotland's going to vote for independence, but equally, there's no guarantee that it won't either.
In the last few hours, a UK government minister has responded to Ms Sturgeon's referendum call, saying this doesn't need to happen for another 25 years. So that's it, isn't it? That's that.
No, it isn't necessarily it. The most significant thing that Nicola Sturgeon actually said today was that she would attempt to hold what would be a legal referendum without getting the sanction from the UK government. Now, this is a very, very old issue. Until David Cameron agreed to the referendum that was eventually held in 2014, the assumption had been inside the SNP that no UK government would ever agree to holding a referendum. And between 2007 and 2011, the SNP spent quite a lot of time trying to work out how you might be able to hold a legal referendum without having the sanction of the UK Parliament. And it'll be interesting to see how much of that work the Scottish Government now picks up. So that's point one. The second point one has to make is there is no guarantee that Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are going to be in power beyond 2024. There has to be an election by the end of 2024. There is a fairly high probability that we will end up with a parliament in which no party has an overall majority, and that within that, a non-trivial prospect that the SNP will hold the balance of power. If the SNP hold the balance of power, they will basically say to the Labour Party and to Sir Keir Starmer, if you want to hold the reins of government, the price is we want a referendum on independence. And I don't think you should rule out the possibility that a deal will get struck in those circumstances that would pave the way for some kind of referendum on Scotland's constitutional future. Boris Johnson is there for now, but he's not there for life.
I don't think this is an appropriate question for a Welshman to ask, but Scotland isn't the only constitutional crisis for the UK government, is it? Northern Ireland and its relationship with Ireland and the EU is also on the back burner. The EU expected to launch legal action against the UK government over its decision to scrap some post-Brexit trade arrangements.
Yes, and indeed, in the same way as that in Scotland, support for independence has gone up somewhat in the wake of the EU referendum. The same is true of Northern Ireland. Support for reunification has gone up to a noticeable degree within Northern Ireland since the EU referendum, because again, that's another part of the UK that voted to remain, and where those on the nationalist side of the argument never wanted to leave the European Union in the first place. There is no doubt, certainly most immediately, there is a constitutional crisis in Northern Ireland because the DUP will not help to allow the new administration to be formed. It's trying to get the DUP back into government that the UK government is trying to pursue, but in pursuing that, the UK government is pursuing a stance that actually probably isn't the majority stance in Northern Ireland. Certainly the evidence of recent polling and the result of the Northern Ireland Assembly election last month suggests that a majority of people in Northern Ireland actually think the Northern Ireland Protocol should be made in place, albeit there is plenty of appetite for improving its operation. But scrapping it, that's not clearly a majority view within Northern Ireland.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson has many other titles. He's also Minister for the Union of the United Kingdom. How is all of this playing with his supporters, both inside the Conservative Party and beyond?
Well, of course, Mr Johnson's government has been pursuing what we might not only pursued a hard Brexit, but he's got a fairly hard view of how the United Kingdom should be run. That is, that he's been insisting that in the post-Brexit world, although there is the possibility of having different regulations on food in Scotland and in Wales and that in England, and a whole variety of other areas of consumer affairs, the UK government is saying, well, if it's legal in England to sell something, it's going to be legal in Scotland and in Wales as well, irrespective of what the devolved administrations want. And the truth is that, those who vote Conservative in England, indeed, and also those who voted Leave, are those who are less sympathetic to a vision of the Union in which you do allow a fair degree of divergence. And to that extent, at least, the United Kingdom government's position is certainly one that largely accords with the views of its own supporters, albeit within England more generally, in the electorate in general, it's not clear that necessarily a majority are opposed to the idea of allowing Scotland to have another referendum.
Sir John Curtice, thank you very much indeed. Sir John Curtice, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde.